Total War Three Kingdoms is a brand new experience for Total War players. Whether you're a returning player or a brand new player, you're going to be probably find that there is a steep learning curve on some elements of the game. In this video, I hope to break down some of all of the basic mechanics of the game. This is basically an expansion on the already existing Total War Academy videos that are built into the game. The ones that I narrated. But this is a means of creating more exposition on the points already covered and maybe adding some fine detail that I wasn't really able to. I'll be splitting these videos up into two parts. This one, the basics, which will cover all the basic mechanics such as movement, character progression, diplomacy, everything of the such. The next video, the advanced one, will cover how to level up properly, how to optimize your settlement, all of the finer, more nuanced things to the game. And if there's a demand, I can do a third video just on the battle map to show you tips and tricks about how to move around and how to like path things and pretty much create little pins to do stuff, all that kind of stuff. But with that being said, let's dive right on in. And let's just kind of start at the very top here. We'll go into the UI itself. We'll go over all the elements over here on the right, on the top, everything like that. So start over, we'll look at the quick lists, which are these fancy little buttons here. You can press Control, F1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. My finger couldn't reach that 5 easily enough. And they'll kind of go over all the easy stuff here. You have all of your current established missions that have been assigned to you, either by your council or by just like the standard scenario of the campaign. You have all of your characters in a really nice little easy to see list here. You can see which ones are at court and not currently assigned to anything. You can see which ones are maybe undercover in, say, a spy network, or which ones are deployed either as administrators or as generals. Now, in addition here, almost all these quick lists have access to some sort of sort functionality, which is really cool. I can sort them by name, I can sort them by occupation, their rank. But the one that you're probably going to use the most is satisfaction. I use this the most to probably see, okay, I know my faction heir, Sun Tzu, is probably going to be the happiest of all my characters. But if I go all the way down here to Lady Wu, who is consequently my wife, she is least satisfied, but that's okay. I'm really into, like, you know, outdoorsy stuff, and she is, and that's probably why. But no, you can get a really good breakdown of why they're not satisfied. Okay, she desires a higher court position, mine 18, faction development events. And that means that there are certain scenarios during the campaign that have presented themselves that she's just not overly stoked with. You can sometimes say, like, hey, I want to choose this, I guess you could say just campaign event over this one, and it will directly tell you that this will affect negatively certain characters. And you can also see like which characters these characters have a harmony and disharmony with, which we'll get into when we talk about the relations. But those are the quick lists here. You can also see your commanding armies, which ones are out, their total movement, their supplies, which characters are in there, or which retinues are in there. You can also see all of your total commanderies, your owned ones, as well as your contested ones. Clicking these arrows gives you a breakdown of who owns each settlement within a commandery. Like if I click Zhangling, I can see that I own the large town, but then I can see that Sai Mao owns the livestock farm. So this is a cool way to kind of jump around the map quickly as you need to. Oh, okay, I know I need to target the livestock farm, but where the hell is that? So these quick lists will become pretty damn useful. I use the character one probably the most, if not all the time. You can also see all the other known factions that you've already found on the map, your relationship with them, as denoted by these fancy masks, and then as well as if you're at war with them, if you're in alliance with them, a coalition, so on and so forth. Now, in addition to that, you also have, we'll move over here to the top left, some other little fancy icons. Now, in the past, you had your turn indicator in the lower right corner of the screen. Now you have it in the upper left in coordinates with which year it is and which season it is. Of course, there are 5 seasons that affect the land and battles in different ways, as it says. This is summer 198 AD or BD. AD. Goddamn, my brain is shit. But you can also see it says turn 40. So if you're wondering what turn you're on, that's how you would find out, or check your save file. In addition, if I scroll down here, I can see my treasury. I can see exactly what is my income, what's my expenditure, what's the total, what I can expect every turn. Now, I can also see family estates. Now, this is not going to come up anymore really for the most part, but family estates are generated by the game based off of the characters I guess, weight and wealth in history. In Sun Jian's history, he had a lot of land. He was very wealthy, a lot of territories and commanderies under his command. But if I look at Ma Teng, he only has 1,500 family estates by comparison to Sun Jian, who has 3,000. So those family estates can really be an indicator of how difficult a campaign is going to be, because that's basically free income that you can't really directly influence by any real means. Your faction leader typically determines what your family estates are. In addition, here you've also got your food. What is benefiting your food? How any additional benefits you have from, like, effects from total income from peasantry and reserves. And then lastly, you have your special resources. I can see that I've got tea as a means of owning a tea maker, which is the tea house from Jia. As you go and capture more things like grain and horses, tool makers and the such, these will begin to light up and say acquired by territory, acquired by trade, however you currently acquire them. In addition, you'll see right there it says resources. Very top, you'll also see current trade influence is 125. The higher your trade influence, the more money you get during trades, and the more resources you can gather from trade. So you can increase your trade influence through certain buildings in your commanderies. Now, in addition, you also have your fancy buttons across the top here. These are all activatable, 1 through 8. You can access them quickly. Like if I press 1, it brings up my faction summary. Let me see here. Oh, your faction currency, if there is any, depending on who you are. Like Gongsun San does not have a faction currency. Same thing with Ma Teng. But I have heroism, and each one of these is broken up by a little notch, and that notch is the different level of your heroism, like Dagger of Jiangdong. And as you progress, there's usually an increase in decay as you get to the top, but you also get obviously far more benefits, like satisfaction increase, recruitment cost reduction, and retinue upkeep reduction. But I can see at the bottom here, I don't get much of anything, and my satisfaction is quite low. And in this case, I know that heroism increases by winning fights, especially fights where I'm outnumbered and I lose less troops. Usually it'll tell you, high heroism will affect certain things, or heroism is increased by losing. Pressing F1 and hovering over will also give you an exact kind of readout of your faction resource. Heroism you can increase by winning duels. You also gain heroism if you inflict more casualties. So it pretty much gives you a good rundown, but that is your faction currency, as well as your persistent effects. These are typically granted by winning certain battles and certain things happening as a means of, say, a campaign situation. I think one of these is... No, none of these are currently giving me granted me a persistent effect this turn. But you'll say, hey, do this mission, and it'll grant me this heroism. For 6 turns, I'll get 5 heroism, and that will pop up here in the persistent effects kind of field of the map. Now, outside of that, we have one last thing I want to talk about with the UI, and this is a new feature to the game. It's called Investigate Issues. Previously, in other iterations of Total War, that's just simply like kind of barred the turn thing here. Every time you go to end turn, it'll say, hey, well, you've got this to do. Well, if you're stuck and you don't know what's going on, you can just press N on the keyboard, and oh, okay, I know. Well, what does this mean? Army action points available. So I've got to do these army action points before I end my turn. Or hey, Shuju has got general skill points available, and she's got low general satisfaction. So this will give you a really good... Oh, even got this up here. No faction council missions. So this will give you a good idea of what you should be doing per turn if you think you're out of ideas or things to do. You can even see it on the campaign map when you're over it, if there's certain things like this, for example, the army action points available, which kind of segues very, very nicely into our next segment, which is movement. Now, movement is very similar to how it has been in every other campaign, but there's a couple of other things here. So, for instance, let me actually bring down some of these menus to see. Oh, these missions, or these things on the right, you right-click them, you dismiss them. So let me left-click here on Sun Jian. Now, if I hold down right-click, see that my little arrow is green and then turns red when I run out of movement. Every single notch of this is 7% of your movement, which you can see in the lower left corner is increasing and decreasing as I pull this arrow. Now, as these little blips are created, I know that it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, how many turns to get to a certain location. There we go. There, it takes me 7 turns to get right here. Now, you do have to be mindful of some other things, though. In this game, terrain is very much a factor here. So if I want to move from here to here, get it. This is going to take me 1 turn. I can see that this is going to, there you go. That's all my movement. But if I want to move from my current location to here, see how that I'm using the same amount of move, but since it's a free open terrain like a road, I'm able to traverse it, way easier. So you have to be really mindful of this when you're moving through mountain passes, through forests, almost just trees in general, because it will very drastically reduce your movement. So if you're trying to chase a rebel army or yellow turbans through, say, the mountain passes of Matung, you can get slowed down by the creation of any kind of terrain or how that really affects your movement. Now, another thing I want to talk about in relation to movement is your stances. You always start out in your normal stance. As always, you can see right here, nothing is hindered and nothing is gained, but you can also recruit. In addition, I can switch into a encampment stance, which will create a kind of makeshift fort for me that actually has towers and walls, so I can defend it if someone decides to attack me. In addition, it'll increase my military supplies. Military supplies are pretty important here because they allow you to replenish, they increase your morale, and on top of it, if you run out of military supplies in enemy territory in the middle of winter, you'll start to take attrition. That's the same thing for reserves in Commanderies, which we'll talk about later. But encampment also allows me to recruit as well. I can't move in encampment stance, and it requires 50% of my movement to adopt, but you get plenty of great bonuses. Now, you also have ambush. Now, ambush is a bit different. You can still recruit, which is great. It only takes 25% to adopt. Fancy, spiffy. But you can't initiate combat, which is fine. You're not supposed to. And it's dependent upon where you are at on the campaign map. So if I hover over this location, I can see my ambush success chance is 100%. Versus, say, this location, an open field, is only 70%. These can be affected by ancillary skills and the such, but basically, if I have a faction that's wanting to attack this city, and I'm over here in this portion of the woods, I can assume ambush stance, and when I do, if they walk in and my ambush chance is high enough, I can ambush them. Meaning, they won't be able to deploy their troops. They'll be in one straight line, and I can deploy 360 around them. You get a really good wrap up, and you can ambush them without them knowing where your troops are going to be on the map, let alone what the map looks like. So it's a really huge advantage to you if you're attacking a force or you're trying to get the upper hand on someone who just kind of keeps evading you. In addition, your last one is Stance March, which is going to increase your movement range by 50%. You can see in the lower left, hovering over it. But you have to be careful here. If you do that and you get caught in a conflict or caught in a fight, you cannot retreat. If you lose the fight, you lose the army. If there's any kind of casualties or the such, they can be ransomed off. But for the most part, you will lose that army. Also, fatigue in battle is tired. And fatigue in this game is way more drastic than it is in any other Total War. So don't think that that's an easy thing to kind of work around. Your troops will move considerably slower. They will take a lot more damage from fresh troops, and they will just have a hard time closing the gap between archers. And archers melt things in this game, so you have to be really, really mindful of that. But as a whole, that kind of sums up our movement here. Let's move into our next section. Faction summary is pretty straightforward, but I want to go over it nonetheless here. You can get just a real good idea. This is the same little kind of dialogue you saw when you started your campaign, going through what makes Sunjian different than any other campaign, right? Your unique characters, you get mercenary captain retinues, which you can summon up in the recruitment phase, and I'll show you guys how to do that. You get mercenary archers and infantry, and you also get the mercenary outpost unique line. In addition, though, you can see these ranks. These things are probably the most important portion of your faction summary, because you can see how much prestige you've gained towards your next rank. And prestige is gained obviously by capturing and expanding settlements or by constructing special buildings. It can also be done through missions. There's a number of factors that contribute to your prestige gain, and it's very important to gain it because you can see, start off as a noble. you're progressing towards a second marquis. And you can see I earned a second marquis in the year 193. As a noble, you only have one assignment slot, 3 armies, and that's it. But as you progress to a second marquis, you gain more assignment slots, you get the administrator position, you get more trade agreements, and you get a spy position. All of those can actually be unlocked from a reform as well, but this grants you those in addition. So if you haven't used the reform for them, this is a great way to get your spy slot, your trade agreement, your administrator slot, so on and so forth. We'll talk about what those are when we get there to their relevant sections. Progressing up though, you're getting more armies, more slots, more satisfaction, all the way to Emperor. Now Emperor basically is your victory condition, and once you kind of make your claim for Emperor, 2 other factions that are big factions will say, oh, me too. And basically the game becomes you destroying those other 2 factions that you become the Emperor themselves. In addition, here you can see also what kind of persistent effects or overall arcing things are a part of your faction, your income, your food source, how many total ancillaries you've got, your army totals, who your ministers are, how many reforms you've actually made, how many spies you've got, assignments and administrators, and then any kind of diplomatic relations you currently have that exist. This is your commanderies, your population. All this is pretty self-explanatory by just kind of hovering over. This shows you your detailed statistics, but as a whole, again, the faction summary is a very powerful screen, but a very self-explanatory screen, but I wanted to go over it nonetheless. Now our next screen is the court screen. This is activated by pressing 2 on the keyboard. Now, of course, we can see my court is pretty well filled out, right? We can see our candidates on the right side. A lot of candidates, actually, too. We can see our family and generals that currently exist, either as generals, nobles, anything of the sort. And then we can see our overarching court itself, administrators, chancellors, and the such. Now, you can see here that some of these are unlocked by unlocking certain ranks. Okay, Marquis, and then Duke, and then King. So you have to be mindful of those if you want those unlocked, either if you don't get them through a reform, which you probably won't, but these are unlocked through climbing up in your faction rank. Now, you can also see some other handy tooltips here. So this denotes that a character is employed as a garrison general. He's also an administrator too, which is nice. But this character you can see is a garrison general as well. This is what is a general. She is out on assignment. This character is eligible for marriage. The men are also a member of your family tree. So you can use this menu very quickly because you can get a good idea of what's going on as far as these different icons and what their meaning are. In addition, you can click any one of these characters and you have a number of court actions you can do. You can banish someone, in which case you confiscate some of their funds, they lower in satisfaction, and they're dismissed from your faction. I'm sorry, that satisfaction is faction wide. Then you can promote them, which is a nice little increase to their salary. It does cost, but it does increase their satisfaction, as well as increasing their title rank and salary. You can release them from service, meaning that they will jump right back down to here. Or I'm sorry, no, they will dismiss over to your candidates pool. You can request their aid, in which case you're basically saying like, hey, I really could use a loan right now. And the rest of the faction will be like, man, you're asking your own dudes for a loan. That's kind of rough, man. So if you're in a pinch, you can do that. And then you can remove them from office, retaining their services, but you just unassign them from office itself. And one thing I want to talk about with every single office is that it has a persistent effect. So you can see position effects. This is granted as an administrator, no matter who you are. Then administrator effects from Lu Su. This means he himself, the specific character Lu Su, the charitable envoy, grants these additional benefits. So not every single character will give the same benefits in any position. You have to be pretty mindful of what you're putting into and where you're putting it into. Lastly, we'll take a look at the family tree real quick. Pretty self-explanatory here. You can see my kids that are growing up. Sun Chuan is just about to mature to actually become an actual court noble. Sun Ren is not there quite yet. Obviously, I think it's at 17 or 18 that happens. But you can also make these individuals faction heirs. I can say, okay, no, Sun Ce, no longer are you going to be faction heir, but Sun Chuan is going to be faction heir. But lastly, you can also adopt and marry from this. So let's say, I know Lu Su's doing a really good job. I really like him. He's a strong character. I'm going to adopt him into my family. Even let's say I've got no heirs and my wife is dead and my kids are dead. You can use this as a means to further your family line. Also, you can marry characters off to other characters within your faction. You can also do that through the diplomacy screen to other factions themselves, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But that kind of sums up the faction menu overall. Next up is the prettiest menu in the game, the Reform tree. Now, this thing it seems self-explanatory, but it can get pretty spicy. So you really should take a look at this if this is your first time playing the game. Sit down, look at it, really look what benefits you and what you want to do for your kingdom. We'll cover this maybe a little bit more in our advanced section, but ultimately you want to choose reforms that fit the commandery you initially have. The blue reforms are geared towards philosophy and trade. You can see this all right up here. Philosophy and trade, these ones are geared towards infrastructure and economy. These are geared towards governmental reforms. This is military doctrines. And then lastly, you've got agricultural reforms. Now, all these icons, for the most part, will grant you an additional building, say for a certain settlement, and then usually some sort of passive bonus. Sometimes though, like if I look at this one, this one, this will grant me a trade agreement. So if I didn't have the option to make trade agreements, this would have granted me that. Also, let's say like the eunuch secretaries will give me an administrator position. So this is a really good way to get an administrator in the very early portions of the game. In fact, I would recommend making this or getting this reform as fast as possible, because having an administrator is a very, very strong key or tool in your arsenal. Now, as you progress, though, you can see that there's other icons on this map. So this denotes that you will unlock a unit when you unlock this reform. Pretty self-explanatory, but it is worth mentioning because in my approach to reforms, I say always build towards the end reform you want. And when I say end reform, I'm talking about the specific type of unit you want to unlock. All these final ones right here will unlock a specific type of dragon. Azure Dragon, I think this is Onyx Dragon, or Pearl Dragon. This is the Yellow Dragons. This is, that's just Mounted Archers. This is the Jade Dragons. And this is the, these are the Azure Dragons. I'm so sorry. I think these are dragons, is that it? Oh, Onyx Dragons. See, I'm a dickhead. But progressing towards these is huge because as you hover over them, you can see what is required to unlock these individual reforms. Every single one of these, if you just hover over it, will tell you, okay, if I want 6 bureaus of bureaucracy, that's very daunting. I know I have to get each one of these in order to unlock it, and even stuff in the red tree. So some of these trees intersect, and you can see when the branches overlap that you'll see, okay, this will require, state monopolies will require a lot of the yellow tree and a lot of the purple tree. So just be mindful when you're choosing your reforms. You only can choose a reform every 5 turns. So you're limited on your total amount of reforms by the grace of the game length itself. So choose very wisely and ultimately build towards the units that you want. But this will sum up your reforms in case you got a little confused by it. Now let's talk about something that is probably the most dense or probably the most important portion of the 3 kingdoms, because you can't have the romance of the 3 kingdoms without the characters. That is such a pivotal, huge part of the story. Now, through the character screen, you get a lot of information, and sometimes you can completely miss it. And honestly, it's a little daunting. So let's really go through it here. We'll fine-tune comb this motherfucker. So Sun Jian, you can see, is his character name. At the top of his class, he is a sentinel. Obviously, he's a legendary sentinel in this case. Then Tiger of Jiangdong is, it seems like it's just simply a title, but that's really his quote-unquote occupation. If I press F1 and hover over, it'll tell you the character's where is it? Oh, the class, very first sentence. The class name, background, and upkeep costs of general are shown. Legendary names is displayed in gold to reflect their deeds and reputation. I'm sorry, this is a background, not the reputation, or their occupation. This is their occupation. So, with this, keep in mind that when you hover over a name, all this information is going to be different every single time. So you want to always make sure you're taking a look at it. So I'm seeing that he has a lot of expertise, way more than, a lot of instinct, way more than a normal sentinel, which gives you a lot of hints on how his playstyle is. Okay, I know he's got a lot of melee damage, and his recruitment cost is thus reduced by his high instinct. Also, you'll get a lot of passive bonuses. Okay, wealthy background, 50% income from family estates, 25% 5% campaign movement range, 6 morale when fighting. Some of these characters will show you what really they should be used for. Okay, 100 charge bonus for Cav, 15% melee damage for all shock Cav. So be mindful of what characters you've got and how you should fill their retinues out. It's not a simple one-to-one thing like, oh, I bought a character, time to just fill them up to the brim. Not that cut and dry. But as you move down here, you can see, who he is, what his position is. We obviously know he is our faction leader, but some characters will just say, like this, for example, will just say general. If I look over here, it'll just say court noble, stuff like that. But as we progress down, we can see his individual upkeep. Now, on this character, you know what? I'm actually going to move to this character because this is more indicative of all the other characters you're going to look at. He has a personal salary. Every character will have a salary which is separate from their upkeep. And there is, of course, their upkeep for their total retinue. See that if I hover over here, their salary and upkeep is put together for that number right there. But this number does not include this number. Be mindful of that. Also, I can see his past loyalties. That way I can see if maybe this character is a spy. He's coming from a faction that I'm currently at war with, and I just recruited him from my candidate pool. I'm going to be wary of this guy. I can see his age, or I'm sorry, status. His age is 85. My son, the ripe age of 85. Now, his current satisfaction, what positive and negative factors are involved, his age, and then, of course, his position. The position can be increased by pressing this button, promoting him, increasing his total salary, but also typically his satisfaction. You've got a number of traits, and these traits are really added more towards the overall character relationships, which we'll talk about towards the end of the video, but they also will give you minor bonuses to certain stat lines or abilities. And most importantly, your faction leader's traits can dictate certain campaign effects that happen. Like, oh, you'll have a certain campaign, a scenario that'll present itself. Well, you can't choose this option because you're loyal, or you can choose this option because you are loyal. So these traits actually do play into the grander narrative of the story, and you should be definitely very mindful of them. Now, this character's, there's one thing I do want to talk about before I move down to stats. This character's little icon here is green, so he is a champion. All those colors will correspond. Red is a vanguard. This color, obviously, this color, purple color is obviously a sentinel. Now, one thing to be mindful is, you see how his has got this really cool animated effect, and he's got a gold name. It means he's a legendary character. Oddly enough, he should be legendary status, but that could be a bug because of my fancy build. But his status should be legendary, and when he is legendary, this will animate and he'll get a gold name, meaning he will gain experience faster, and he will basically not die as easily when it comes to combat. He'll get wounded more often. But as you can see here, you've got your individual attributes, expertise, resolve, cunning, instinct, and authority. They'll all play into the color of your character, your champion. But keep in mind too, each one has a campaign effect and a battle effect. Production cost and melee evasion, general's health and population. So each one of these will affect both. Be mindful of those. These are your skills, obviously. As you progress through them, you will need to do certain things. Like, so if I want to unlock a middle one, I need to have a top or a bottom of that corresponding skill line. These skills, though, are a great way to get good abilities for administering commanderies, or let's say you want to have better abilities on the battlefield. Vengeance will grant you the scare ability on the battlefield. So really choose these skills depending on how you want your character to kind of evolve. Obviously with Hongai, I've got him as a general, so I'm not going to want to choose or focus on things that are better for commanding a commandery, or I'm sorry, administering a commandery. I want things that are more focused towards combat, or in this case, fighting other characters. Now, I do want to go quickly into the ancillaries. You have all of your many ancillaries here. Armor will change the look of your character, which is kind of cool, right? Like I'm playing Diablo all over again. And you have a quality scale, again, just like, say, like a Diablo, with white being the most common, no border on that one, of course, and gold being the unique, uncommon. Now, you can see what they can equip by looking over here. Same thing with armor. He can only equip champion armor. And then with the followers, you can see who's equipped what and where. Hovering over these, you'll see, what they gain. They'll usually give you stat lines, if not a passive bonus, maybe even a skill, like typically a formation. Like if I look at this character's, the herdsman grants the wedge formation, which is good for cav. But be mindful of the colors of everything. Again, we'll talk about the colors more in the advanced thing. All the legendary characters of like the romance lore, their armor cannot be removed, but you can replace their weapons as you need. For the most part, though, this is a very straightforward portion of the game with the ancillaries, but how they can really stack up is really up to you and how you want your character to progress. Lastly, you've got the military tab, which shows you your character's individual stats, as well as which special units they can recruit, their current retinue, and then their persistent battle effects as dictated by, say, okay, a fallen friend. This will happen if one of my friends dies, or this happens currently since I have friends alive. And I've got this activatable ability, which has got this gold rim around it, and I can use that when I get into duels or if I'm in combat. And lastly is our relation. Well, lastly, I said lastly already, is our relationship tab. This will show us, you know, the bigger icons are major relationships. I'm a close friend with Sun Jian, my father, and I have an acquaintance with my mother, Lady Wu. And then, you know, these are minor people I don't like. Even if your character just becomes of age, they'll have these characters they don't like. Maybe it was through a diplomacy or some sort of situation when they were growing up. There's always something like a Tao Qian. I never met Tao Qian in this game, but still, this exists. So be mindful of that. These little dialogue boxes we'll talk about more in the relationship section. But as a whole, that will cover the characters individually. Now, as far as armies go, that's a bit different. So you've got your armies here, your individual retinues and whatnot. So you've got a lot going on. So for one, the stack here, the darker green represents that it's the army strength, right? The more notches the bar has, the stronger the army, up to a maximum of 21 notches. But the darker green represents that things are replenishing. So that's not at full force right now. Once that darker green is completely gone, it'll be at full force. Now, if I look over here, I can see the total amount of units in an individual unit. It's also represented up there, 120 out of 120. And then that unit's rank, which is 9. If I hover over here, it tells me how much experience till that rank increases, and then also that unit's upkeep. One thing, too, to be mindful of is the toggle comparison mode. I have it turned on by default. You turn it on once and it's done. But if I hover over another unit, it'll compare that unit for me. By default, this is off. So if I hover over another unit, it doesn't show me. It just shows me that other unit. I would turn it on. Also, you can see any kind of special abilities this character has. So he's immune to terror. He ignores forest penalties when he's running through forests. Resistant to fatigue, which is very strong. Again, I can't stress it enough. He's got charge negation. And lastly, of course, this is attrition immunity, which is quite cool. And this shows which immunity it is, and in this case, it's regionless, meaning when I am outside of my own region and there's attrition for any reason, he will not have that attrition. Pressing this button will give you a simplified or detailed description of your character's stats, or I'm sorry, your unit's stats. In addition to our characters individually, you can only have 3 per army with 6 total units per retinue. Now, each unit, you can do a number of things as well. So you can swap a unit, disband a unit. You can upgrade a unit, so that button is. I don't know why that says stance. You can only do that for the army itself. So one thing to know about swapping a unit versus deleting a unit and summoning another one. If I were to click swap a unit, let's just do this full one. And I choose one of these, the 120 men that are already commissioned to be mercenary infantry will then jump over to a new task. Let's just say it's Archer Militia. Rather than recruiting them from nothing, which should be around 20-25 soldiers, they'll be at about 50% health, meaning they will muster way faster because there's already existing units kind of used in a military engagement or a military capacity. Rather than recruiting from scratch, that'll take you a longer time to muster. So swapping units allows you to swap up from, say, G Militia to G Infantry when we unlock that reform, and it allows you to get them up and running a lot faster. So use unit swapping when you're trying to replace a unit with a more advanced unit. Do not disband if you avoid it. Lastly, you also have, or lastly when it comes to the characters themselves, you have the ability to do certain things with just them. So you can move the selected retinue outside of this force, creating its own army effectively, if you have army slots available. Also, you can recall the selected retinue back to your court. You can swap the selected retinue by clicking this button. I can just choose like Zhao Yu, for example. I can place him in, and I can see that it's going to cost me $27.50 to replace him as far as an upfront recruitment cost, what he'll cost per turn, and what his total satisfaction is, as well as his existing retinue. Also, I can open the, yeah, that's not important. I can swap it so that Sun Jian is no longer my general, the front-facing most character, and I can make it so that Huang Gai is my current general. So you've got a lot of abilities or actions you can do per unit or per character. You've also got your persistent army effects, just like our persistent campaign effects up here. I can see spent season in own domain, army effects, and then general effects that I can do night battles as a result of my skills. This is typically a combination of all your character's skills and ancillaries put into one easy to look at screen. You've got your total movement army action points here, your military supplies, which we talked about, the total amount of soldiers, and then lastly, you have got your cost per turn, what the upkeep is for this entire military force. But this goes over the basic level of our armies. Let's jump into some commanderies and some of the more, I guess, empire building statistics or portions of the game. So we'll take a look at our capital, Changsha, and kind of go over some of the base stats of commanderies themselves. And you can get a really good view of a lot of stuff by just looking at this little placard. It'll show you like your population, how your public order is doing and stuff like that. But the nuance portion of it is in this lower left corner here. So if I hover over the copper coin, I can see income. This shows me my total income broken down. Take a look at the top two portions of this. This is so important for optimizing income. We'll talk about that in the advanced portion, but I can see the majority of my income comes from commerce, while a little bit more of it comes from peasantry. Gives me my total net, my tax level, corruption, stuff like that, building upkeep, and what my total amount is made from this commandery per turn. Also, I've got my public order. This is going to show me what negative factors and positive factors exist right now. Obviously, my population, it looks to be a little crowded, and we'll talk about that in a second too. Reserves, how much total reserves I have for the people of my city. Now, as this drops to 0, my city will start to starve. Once it reaches 0, my city will start to starve because they'll be eating up their just freshly produced food. They won't be using a reserve. With a high reserve, you can outlast sieges longer. Also, it'll help out with mustering and replenishing troops. You want to keep your reserve as high as possible. Now, lastly, our population is at 1.8 million. It is capped out right now. Now, when you look through this, you can see effects from total. Peasantry income bonus, 100% out of a possible 350%. You get an idea that as you increase in population, you have both issues, public order penalties, and you've got benefits. You can see that we're going to get a lot more replenishment, a lot more income, a lot of construction time reduction. So you have to kind of balance that dual-edged sword of increasing your population and the public order that comes with it, and all the benefits you get from income. So be mindful of those little things. As we look over at the settlement administration, we can click here. We can see the first of our garrison forces. Let's click back here. This icon denotes that it is a stationed army or garrison army, versus this icon is the garrison that innate within the settlement itself. You'll have your administrator, if you have one present, and then the settlement's garrison, if there is one. Usually the outlying settlements have different garrisons and bigger garrisons that increase as you build. You can see right here, if I hover over this, left side, garrison, and then if I hover over that, the garrison increases. As you build up, you increase the garrison for all these settlements. You don't have to worry about defending them so much and building defensive structures in the settlement. Just simply increasing the level of the settlement itself will increase that. Coming back over here to system admin or settlement admin, you can see the rank of the city, the tower level, and then the wall strength. Now, there are a lot of other things here too. There's the persistent commandery effects, just like there are for everything else. There's average fertility, which tells me like how well the production of food is. I can see my location effects, as far as things such as corruption or reserve capacity, public order, so on and so forth. And I can also see my general effects created by having Lady Wu in there as a whole. Now, in addition, you've got your settlement, right? Let's right click on the small city. And I can see here that since the rank 4 small city, my building slots are 3. Now as I progress up to 5, it becomes building slots 4. Then our next one's at 7. Then our next one is at 8. And that's our last one. You get a total of 6 building slots. So as you want to increase the amount of slots in your commandery, or your settlement, your main settlement, it used to be called provincial capital. I guess I'll just say that again. Provincial capital, you need to build a higher settlement ranking. Also, be mindful of the grouping of all of your buildings. We've looked at these colors before, and we'll talk about that on how to optimize your commandery in the advanced video. But these groupings will give you an idea of what's going on. Like for instance, oh, I really want to increase my trade influence. Well, let's go to the marketplace. 150% increase to my trade income from commerce, and 50% trade influence right there. So you can see that, oh, these buildings are learning and market buildings. These buildings are military buildings. This all corresponds back to the reform system, where in those reforms will unlock different buildings within their kind of matching color, I guess you could say. So one last thing I want to talk about in this section is, well, two last things, is both the assignments and the administrators, which we loosely talked about. So you'll see your name over here, or the commandery name. You click over here for assignments, and we click up here. We can take a look at who we can assign. We can typically assign any court noble that is not already deployed or has abilities or has this personal assignments that it can use. So Chengpu, for example, if I left click him, I can see that he can increase, or he can help out with building upkeep, construction time, and construction costs. It'll last for 5 turns, and it takes 1 turn to recall him. Liu Ji, on the other hand, he's got the same thing, supervised construction, but he also has surplus markets and counteract corruption. Keep in mind, you cannot have 2 of the same assignments going, so I can't double stack my supervised constructions, but I can stack bonuses. So let's take a look at Shuju, who's already in there. 75% income from commerce, silk, and spice. Well, we already know that commerce is a main focal point of my income, and surplus markets also increases my income from commerce. So you can stack this up to get a 125% increase to your income from commerce. So assignments are a great way to get a lot of really burst income or help out with construction or other issues you're facing in your commandery. They can also do public order. Just depends on what the character's class is. Everyone's got different assignments. Now, last thing is the administrator. We talked about the static effects of a position. This is them right there. 1 army, 15% income, no desire for higher rank, 30% corruption. And these icons are the ones that are granted as a result of this individual character. Now, I'll be honest, I've stacked this character. Where's Lusu? I've stacked this character to have abilities. Okay, this one says in 15% income from industry, ancillaries, construction time for commanderies. You basically just want to stack items and skills that make him a good administrator. So that's how you create strong, good administrators. And ultimately, that's how you kind of go through ruling over your commanderies as a whole. No Total War game would be complete without a riveting amount of diplomacy. And you can see from our diplomacy screen that that is the case here. So you can see your territory. You can sort this by status, ownership, none. The same things you can do in pretty much every other game. And you can also get, again, a good breakdown of who likes me and who doesn't quite like me. And then hovering over these shows us what their attitude is towards me and why. They have a personal rivalry towards me. I've already beat the crap out of them in many, many wars. Wars of atrocity against our friends as well. So you get a good breakdown of what's going on. As you click these, you can see what your persistent current diplomatic deals are. I've got no allies, no vassals, no trade partners. Got a lot of war though. Same thing here with Cao Cao. No allies, no vassals, a lot of trade partners, and a good deal of war. You can also get a sense for how rich they are, how much food they've got, so I can trade my abundant amount of food for some of their abundant income, also their faction rank, and their relative faction strength to you. So he is a global rank of 3, and I am not that in that case. So clicking negotiate brings up all the many deals that we can do, and each one of these is very self-explanatory for the most part. Declaring war on them, you can request permission to declare war on a vassal of theirs that maybe has slighted you. You can request military support. You can aid them in their wars. Peace as well is pretty self-explanatory. Now, the trade screen is a lot different. You do have trade agreements like we've had in every other game. They have certain resources available to them, but you can also trade territories. That's finally back. And you can join their faction through marriages, which is pretty cool. You can also offer and receive marriages as well. But another thing is you can now trade ancillaries. You can also say, hey, you know what? I've got a lot of food. So why don't I offer food to trade and request regular payments with that food? So I know for 10 turns, I'm going to give Cao Cao 4 food. But for 10 turns, I'm requesting 50 gold or 50 copper. So basically you can use this to trade outside of the existing trade agreements, generate further money for yourself, especially if you see yourself stockpiling either gold or copper or food. Like, I mean, I'm hurting on food. I'm going to use this because I see he's very rich in food, and I'm going to make regular payments to him and request food. So you can also add in ancillary to sweeten the pot. So this is a really good way to trade outside of the normal trade, which is done automatically in the game. In order to trade to, you will need to have an existing route between your factions. Vassalages you can create. You can argue for independence. Like if I look at this vassal, Sai Mao. Ooh, I'm at war with them. Whoopsies. Well, if I wasn't at war with them, I could say, hey, you know, I'll help you. I'll make sure you become independent and stuff like that. You can basically say, like, become my vassal instead. Things like that. You can really kind of get underneath. Liberating them removes them from vassalage and makes them their own independent empire or faction once again. Then you have alliances. You can create coalitions and then military alliances. Coalitions is like, hey, it's like a defensive alliance. Like, hey, if something happens, I'm there for you. But military alliances, let's band together and go fight Dong Zhuo, stuff like that. And then lastly, we've got diplomatic treaties such as your non-aggression pacts, your military accesses, your confederates, your abdicates, which in case you say, hey, you know what? I abdicate emperorship to you. This is something that you would want them to do to you. You don't want to do it to them. And then pledge to share the mandate and win together for a co-op victory. Lastly, of course, you have your war coordination targets that you can then focus on. Oh, you know, I should probably do this. Let's say, okay, I want food, and I will make a payment. Well, there's a button over here that says make this work. See if I can get that to trick off here. It might only be in quick deals. Yeah, okay, so we'll bring up the quick deals thing and I'll show you guys that instead. So the other option here is quick deals. These are things that I can do quite easily with other factions. So military access, sign a deal, or press negotiate, negotiate deal. If it says yes, you can usually just press sign a deal. They'll say yes, no, or maybe. Negotiate deal. It says, okay, this is what I want between both our factions. Okay, well, negative 5.7. Make this work. Okay, well, I'm just going to trade this many ancillaries. The Red Stallion, for example, will get me what I need. And I can also, since it's a positive 0.9, I can say, okay, well, also, I'll request a payment from you. So you can do things to make things work by pressing that button and just make it quick and easy for you. And this kind of cuts down a lot on what you would normally spend in a diplomacy menu. The game is very streamlined in that regard. So diplomacy should be a lot more accessible and easier this time around. All right, I know I said I'd get back to relationships. Let's talk about those real quick here. So we talked about the major and minor characters, but these little blips tell us which either their occupations or which traits kind of coincide with other characters and why. So commands bravery, respects patience, focuses on family. This is loyal and trusting and unreadable warrior. Why do these things kind of play hand in hand? Or if I look at another character, hey, you know, we don't like each other because we're peace, because I broke the peace, or you broke the peace, or you're a peacekeeper and I'm fiery, meaning I like war. So you can see things that have created a rift between two individuals or people that are just rivals. Like, okay, I've gotten in so many fights with Dong Zhuo that I'm now his rival because of diplomacy, battles, and past events. And that's important because you can be a rival with someone strictly on diplomacy alone. So battles can sometimes kind of add that spice. Now, this does affect more than just the characters here. If I click my court, I can see that Sun Ce has got harmony and disharmony. So he doesn't really like Lu Ji, but he likes Sun Jian. This might create issues because your relationship with your characters is important. That's what satisfaction is so important, because as your characters kind of increase, say even an administrator or these higher characters in your court, they can eventually actually leave your faction and create a civil war. But you want to make sure you have characters that are in harmony, or their disharmony is not so strong that it's creating such a huge dissatisfaction that your factions might revolt against themselves. So again, be mindful of that. Make sure that your administrators, and your chancellors, and your factionaries are all getting along. In this case, I did it to, I think I was doing some. I think I just wanted to fill the slot. I don't remember why I put Lu Ji there. But again, make sure that these slots are taken care of properly. Also, pressing the characters button over here on the, this is the court screen. I can see all of the characters that I've currently, like, I want to say unlocked, but characters I've currently seen. So if I want to see Lu Bu, okay, well, I know that him and Dong Zhuo are firm friends. I know he does not like me, and he does not like Li Zhu, but I don't know these characters that Dong Zhuo does like. Sorry, these are characters related to Dong Zhuo. You need to kind of, as you progress through the game and find more characters and find them on the map, like Dong Sun Zan, I know I've seen Liu Bei, but I don't know these characters. I don't know these characters. You can then start to organize things like who's the oldest, okay, who's the highest expertise. I am the highest expertise of all the characters that I currently know. I can see the same stuff. Okay, so these are all the characters that I have relationships with. Here's the minor ones. So that kind of sums up your overall relationship and how it plays into things. This is a pretty big thing, so do focus on your relationships. Make sure that your relationships are coinciding properly, or else you're going to have a lot of issues down the road. So before we wrap up this video, there's two things I want to go into real quick. One, the Undercover Network. In order to appoint an Undercover Network, there will be a plus sign here. You click it and you choose a faction. And then you will have two currencies, your Undercover Network cost and then your cover points. These increase the longer your character is deployed. And as your character kind of climbs through the faction rank, they can become, say, currently he's a general, but I can become an administrator. I can become inducted into the family itself. And when you do that, you can see you have different choices and options you can do, like poisoning military supplies. An administrator can actually take over an enemy's faction or an enemy's territory and bring it to your faction. So planting spies is a really cool and really fun way to get ahead of a character that you're at war with. And the more spies you plant, the faster your Undercover Network grows. Cover is usually dictated by one of your characters in specific, and then Undercover Network does play into that. So you can see here, your active spies will help build your Undercover Network over time. Over time, your spies will establish a convincing personal cover, thereby allowing them to perform increasingly ambitious actions. So the more spies you place, the more goodies you get. And if things get too rough, they start getting discovered, you can disown them. You also have to be mindful too, is they can actually defect, leave the faction. So if they get too happy over there, they can leave your ass. And lastly, here's the treasury. I just wanted to go through this real quick. You can increase your taxes through here. I find that this actually doesn't give you the best representation of your income. I think you get that better from the individual commandery. I almost never use the screen because I almost never touch the tax level. This is important too. So you've got your faction council, right? So this is a chancellor. Well, he can appoint you individual missions that you can then go on to benefit your faction. So if you are kind of like stuck, like I don't know where to really go, your faction council will give you a mission that says, hey, complete an additional settlement administration to increase your population because there's overpopulation in this one town. These guys will always be that kind of extra eye for you. But as a whole, guys, I hope this really helps you get your feet wet with the Three Kingdoms. I know it is a very dense video and it is a very dense game itself. So I will be putting, of course, little bullet points here so you can jump to individual portions of this video to find things that you might have lost touch on or you want to brush up on. Hopefully, if you have more questions, the advanced video will cover it. And if it doesn't, please go ahead and make a comment below. I will always be monitoring these no matter how old this video becomes. And I'll always make sure to get your question answered so that you have a good idea of how to progress through your campaign. If at any point you get lost, I'll always be there in the actual, if you press F1 and right click, I'll always be there to give you a bullshit summary of, an actual summary of each and every one of these things in the game, guys. But as always, thanks so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.